Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the next video in this little series while we glass a board for Howse Surfboards. So in the last video we did the bottom layer to the cut lap here. This is called a cut lap because I'm currently cutting the lap, and once we get this all cut out nice and neat, then we're going to work on putting down the deck patch, and we're going to do our deck to our tuck, so wrapping the rails again one more time. I believe from memory this was a 6-ounce layer on the bottom of this board, and then we're probably going to do a 4-ounce deck patch and a 6-ounce deck to our tuck. So we'll finish those stages off in this video, and then the next video will be our sanding coats and maybe our gloss coats as well. We'll see how far along we get in that one. I will just quickly mention that I do have some board repairs filmed and ready to edit, so I'm actually going to set aside Sunday, so not tomorrow but the next day. I'm going to set that aside and get the next ding repair video out because it has been a while. It's been really busy at work. Where I live is really seasonal, so town gets super busy during the summer seasons and especially the holiday period. A lot of people in the water, a lot of people surfing, so it's kind of my peak time for my business, and that's when I sort of have the opportunity to make a bit of extra money and put it aside for the off season. So it's been a little bit harder to get to YouTube and edit some videos in the last month or two, but on Sunday we will definitely pump out another one. So we're getting ready to lay our deck patch down here. So I've cut the lap out, obviously, we saw that, and I've now remasked right on the edge of where that cut lap is. So we're going to lay this deck patch down, and then once that's cured, we'll cut that out, and then we'll have to sand down any high bits of cloth, anything that's jutting up, and is going to kind of cause air bubbles beneath our next layer of cloth, which will be on the same side here, the deck side, and wrap the rails one last time towards the tuck. This is definitely my favourite lamination stage of doing boards because it's pretty easy. You don't need a lot of resin, you don't need to worry about the rails. I can mix like bang on the amount of resin, I don't have any go to waste. So yeah, this is definitely the easiest stage of lamination in the whole process. Like I said in the previous video, I'm only glassing maybe 1 to 3 boards a month maximum, so there are certainly people out there who are much more accomplished board laminators than myself, so I don't feel like I'm in a position to teach people how to do this, but if I could give you one tip when it comes to this stage of the lamination process, it would be to pay extra close attention to where that tape edge is, because our deck patch needs to rise a little bit when it meets that tape edge, because that tape edge is of course the edge of our first lamination from the bottom of the board. So it's going to be prone to air bubbles. So once I get all this cloth wet out, I'm going to go around the board and I'm going to wipe all of that tape basically and work out any air bubbles. Because if we get air bubbles, then when this resin cures and we do cut this deck patch out, we're going to open up those air bubbles and create voids, and that's going to make air bubbles underneath our next layer of glass. So that's exactly what I'm doing here. I'm just making sure that there's no air bubbles where our deck patch that we're laminating now meets that masking tape, just flattening it all out. And then of course, before it all kicks off, we want to wipe off as much excess resin as possible. The more resin you leave on it, the more uneven your surface is going to be, the heavier your board will be. So a little bit gutted at this stage because I've realised, of course, editing this, that there's something on my camera lens, so it is a little foggy. Apologies for that. But we've cut that deck patch out, and now we've got our next layer of cloth going on, and this is going to wrap the rails again to the tuck. I've sanded the board before this stage, so just any high areas of fiberglass cloth, particularly on the tail and the nose, and there are some little wings on this board, so I've sanded any high spots that this layer of cloth wouldn't nicely just fold over. Of course, this is a poly board, so this resin's really sticky, so I don't want to sand too much because it's a nightmare to sand, but we just want to knock down any high patches before this stage. So my method when it comes to laminating a board, especially with poly, if you keep the resin in the pot, it's going to heat up a lot quicker because it's condensed in that pot, and it's going to kick a lot quicker. So the first thing I do is empty my pot completely. I get rid of all the resin, pour it all on the board, and I massage it over the whole board to wet the cloth out, and I avoid the rails. I get as close to the rails as I can, but I don't want to lose resin running off the rails quite yet. And then I split that ball of resin in half, and I wipe half of it off the tail back into the pot, catching as much as I can, and half of it off the nose back into that pot, catching as much of it as I can. So during this whole process, the deck is now entirely wet out, all the cloth is saturated, so that's what we want. And now we have all of our resin, or depending how good a catch I am, we have most of the resin back in the pot. So now we can start working on saturating those rails. I've wiped the deck off pretty hard, so there's not a lot of excess resin left on the deck. It'll need more wiping after this for sure, but I've got as much resin as possible back into that pot for these rails. All in all, my goal is to have the resin in the pot for less than 2 minutes per board, really. I'm mixing the catalyst in for 40 seconds, then I'm emptying all of it out on the board, I'm spreading it all around, I'm catching it all off the tail and the nose, and then I'm pouring it all back out onto the rails. So I really don't want that resin sitting in the pot for any longer than it has to, especially with poly, because it kicks kind of in an unpredictable manner. Not completely unpredictable, but it's very temperature dependent, and it's not set in stone like epoxy is on how long it's going to take until it starts gelling and becomes unworkable. So now that our rail curtains are all wet out, we're finished with the deck. So I'm going to take this opportunity just to squeegee the deck off quickly one more time, get rid of any excess resin that might have been left behind, and then we can work on wrapping those curtains around the rails. My first goal with the rails is just to wrap the cloth and get it stuck down so that the rails are wrapped. I'm not trying to make them perfect straight away, I just don't want the resin to gel before I manage to get all those curtains wrapped around. So first goal, get them stuck down, and then tweak them afterwards, do all the final details. If there's any dry spots, touch them up, but I just want this to stick. A lot of people do struggle getting the curtains to stick, and I can tell you that the longer your curtains are, the heavier they are with all that resin soaking them, so the harder it's going to be for you to get them to stick down. So kind of within reason, you don't want to cut those rail curtains super long. You might notice here too that I'm free lapping this, so I don't have any masking tape on the underside. I very rarely put masking tape on the tuck when I'm doing this final stage of lamination from the deck around to the tuck. I normally free lap it because I'm going to put a sanding coat on after this, and I'll be able to even all that out afterwards. And I don't have to put any more cloth on this board after this, so I don't have to worry about laminating cloth over an uneven surface. I can pour resin over an uneven surface, but I can't put cloth over an uneven surface. Now that the rails are all wrapped and the cloth is all stuck down, now I can go back around it and tweak that cloth, wipe out all that excess resin, get rid of any drips, tidy up the nose, tidy up the tail. But at least I know now if my resin does gel and I lose it right now, all the fiberglass is stuck down at the very least. So if I'm left with any high spots, I can sand them out after I put our next coat of resin down, our sanding coat. And that's it for this stage. It's that simple. No, I kid. So being poly resin, this remains sticky. I don't need to sand it before we do our next stage. So now I just wait for it kind of to kick off enough that I can mask it. And then we're able to put our sanding coat on the top, flip it over, put it on the bottom. So we'll do that in the next video, which I guess will be out next week sometime. But we will have a ding repair video before the next stage of this board. I will endeavour to get that out on Sunday, New Zealand Sunday, for all you Northern Hemisphere people. Don't look at that nose too closely, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment, do whatever people on YouTube normally tell you to do, and we will see you on Sunday for the next one. Cheers guys, hope it was helpful. Choo-hoo!